The term near-death is a very wide term which is very difficult to define, and therefore we decided to study a group of people who've objectively and scientifically reached the point of death. We know from clinical practice that the definition of clinical death is a person who has no heartbeat and no breathing, and also whose brain stops functioning. And looking at what happens to a patient during cardiac arrest is that by definition they have the first two criteria, and that within a few seconds their brain also stops functioning.
When you have a cardiac arrest, if you monitor brain waves or the electrical activity of the brain, you find that within 8 seconds it's almost absent. And it's absent throughout the brain, so you don't have little pockets of activity. So, to all intents and purposes, once the heart has stopped, the brain ceases to function. Now, we know from our neuroscience that you cannot have experience without a functioning brain. So, once the brain function has stopped, then all experience must stop. If it doesn't stop for any reason, then you've made a very strong statement, and that is that mind and brain are not the same.
If this were true, then many established theories concerning how the brain works would be challenged.
I think that what's happening during out-of-the-body experiences, which are vivid and dramatic and life-changing experiences in themselves, is that the brain is simply building a different view of itself. I mean, this idea that now I am inside here looking out at this world is just an idea. There isn't really somebody in there. As far as brain science is concerned, you know, what's in here? Millions of neurons, all connected in billions of ways to each other. There isn't a central controller. There isn't a little me in there. All that is a kind of illusion constructed by our language.
But Dr. Sam Parnier and Peter Fennick are not convinced. With their research into cardiac arrest patients, they are trying to define when the experience occurs. Could it be happening at the point consciousness is lost, or when we regain consciousness, or the unthinkable? That the near-death experience is happening when the brain is not functioning.
One of the things that's always fascinated me is when does the near-death experience actually occur? Because the common story is that you go nearly dead, your brain's not active anymore, you flatline or whatever, and you're having this experience while the brain's dead, and then you wake up and remember it. But actually, it's very, very difficult to pin down the time when it happens.
But in Atlanta, Georgia, one particular case was about to astonish experts and doctors. Dr. Michael Sabom, a cardiologist, was also studying near-death experiences when he came across one extraordinary account.
Pam's case unique in the fact that she had her near-death experience at a time that she was fully instrumented and under medical observation. And I think if you wanted to construct a laboratory experiment where you had someone and took them as close to death or perhaps even into death as possible and then bring them back and ask them what they could recall, Pam's case probably comes closest to that than any other so far that we know of.
Neurosurgeon Dr. Robert Spetzler decided to take on Pam's case against all odds.
That aneurysm is all the way at the very base of the brain, and that is why it's so incredibly difficult to get there. So you have to go somehow through the skull, because remember the face is here and the neck is down here, to get down to this very difficult spot.
The operation Pam was about to undergo was known as Operation Standstill. Pam's body temperature would be lowered to between 10 and 15 degrees centigrade. Her heart and breathing stopped, her brain waves flattened, and the blood drained from her head. She would be clinically dead for a whole hour of the operation.
What we want to do is we want to bring that brain to a halt. We don't just want the brain to be asleep. We want the metabolic activity of the brain to stop. Every measurable output that the body puts out really disappears completely, so that you have no measurable neuronal activity whatsoever.
I don't remember an operating room. I don't remember seeing Dr. Spetzler at all. I was with a fellow. One of his fellows was with me at that time. After that, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Until the sound. and the sound was unpleasant, was guttural. It was reminiscent of being in a dentist's office. And I remember the top of my head tingling, and I just sort of popped out of the top of my head. And I was then looking down at the body. I knew it was my body, but I didn't care. My vantage point was sort of sitting on the doctor's shoulder. I remember the instrument in his hand. It looked like the handle of my electric toothbrush. I had assumed that they were going to open the skull with a saw. I had heard the term saw, but what I saw looked a lot more like a drill than a saw. It even had little bits that were kept in this case. And I remember distinctly hearing a female voice saying,
"We have a problem. Our arteries are too small. Try the other side."
I don't think that the observations she made were based on what she experienced as she went into the operating room theater. They were just not available to her. For example, the drill and so on, those things are all covered up. They're not visible. They were inside their packages. You really don't begin to open until the patient is completely asleep so that you maintain a sterile environment.
She also heard a conversation during the operation between Dr. Spetzler and the cardiovascular surgeons who were cutting into her legs to hook her up to the heart-lung machine. When the cardiac surgeon incised her right groin, she found that her veins and arteries were too small, and she had to go over to the left side. And there was some conversation at the time between the doctors. Pam accurately recalled hearing that conversation.
At that stage in the operation, nobody can observe, hear in that state. And I find it inconceivable that your normal senses, such as hearing, let alone the fact that she had clicking modules in each ear, that there was any way for her to hear those through normal auditory pathways.
This is a classic near-death experience occurring under extremely monitored medical conditions where every known vital sign and basically every clinical sign of life and death was being monitored at the time. And that's what makes her case so remarkable and so valuable to us.
I don't have an explanation for it. I don't know how it's possible for it to happen, considering the physiological state she's in. At the same time, I have seen so many things that I can't explain that I don't want to be so arrogant as to be able to say that there's no way it can happen.
I think it is much more likely that the experiences are happening both when you go into unconsciousness and when you're coming out, in those borderline states in which we know all kinds of strange hallucinations and peculiar feelings happen anyway, and that it's not happening right in the middle when people are clinically dead. Now, to find out the answer is very difficult. We need to have some kind of timing mechanism for the experience. Now that means catching somebody describing something happening at a specific time and that we know what was happening in their brain at that time. That's very difficult to arrange. So for the moment we don't know. And my strong betting is that all of the experiences are happening at the beginning and the end in that borderline state.
I think death is an illusion. I think death is a really nasty, bad lie. I don't see any truth in the word death at all.